I'm Dan Jones. Welcome to Interchange. We have so much to talk about today. Now we've reached the point where both the United States and Russia are both dropping bombs on Syria. Does this mean we are allies or still enemies? We'll talk about the latest poll, which shows more and more people not approving of the job Governor Scott Walker is doing. And we'll talk about a plan to let more non-Wisconsin residents enroll at the UW in Madison. And we will also talk about the end of a very bad year for the Milwaukee Brewers. Before we get going, let me introduce everybody. You know, longtime newspaper columnist Joel McNally, and Kevin Fischer, who spent many years as a broadcast journalist, many years after that as a legislative aide in Madison. And Denise, Callaway, former TV news reporter, now a communications and public relations professional. And Gerard, Randall, education and job creation consultant. All right, so this week, much to the dismay of the United States, Russian planes started bombing Syria, an effort, according to Russia, to crush Islamic militants while supporting Syrian President Bashar Assad. We, too, have been trying to bomb ISIS strongholds in Syria, so are we now allies with Russia, or will this lead to a head-to-head battle between us and the Soviets? What do you think, Denise?
Well, I think where we're in a dangerous point is that both of us may be about ready to enter a quagmire that only has become more complicated by our dual involvement and engagement in Syria. I think the interesting thing is that the Russians are saying, we are going after ISIS. We're going after terrorist groups. And according to our government, they actually are not going after ISIS. They're going after some of the groups that have been resisting the current regime in Syria. So I think it's about ready to become more complex. Earlier this week, there was about an hour-long discussion between Russian military officials and officials from the U.S., and we're still trying to figure out how we're going to make sure we don't inadvertently start causing problems for each other. The problem is, I don't think we can do that because I don't know, quite frankly, that either of us are being really honest about where we're dropping bombs. The one thing I do know is that so far, and it's been primarily the U.S. efforts, we haven't seen them yield a lot of success. If we mean by success that we're seeing those folks who are opposed to the Assad regime really gaining some ground and territory. I think the one thing that we have done so far between the Assad regime and between the U.S. government is we've bombed the heck out of the people of Syria, and we've caused literally tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of them to flee their homes. I think this is only going to make it more complicated, and it's only a matter of time before the disaster that we have going on in Syria is going to get worse.
Kevin, a lot of people on the right say this is just like Ukraine, another example that Putin doesn't care at all what Obama thinks. He's going to do whatever he wants to do, period.
Well, he doesn't. And as you know, I'm not a fan of the president. I'm not a fan of him as a commander-in-chief. I think he's been weak with a mamby-pamby foreign policy. But there is a school of thought that says, you know, maybe, and I don't know if the administration is using this rationale, but maybe by staying away and not getting too involved, and there has been some bombing, but not getting as aggressively involved as Putin, that might be the prudent way to go. If the Russians are indeed going after ISIS, well, let them take out some of ISIS's forces, one of our biggest enemies, right? Let them do the dirty work. It doesn't cost one American life. It doesn't cost one American dime. And if he's successful, fine. If he's not, then Putin is weakened. And maybe that's not so bad for the United States. Denise hit a great point that we don't want to get to the point where we not purposely but inadvertently tick off the Russians, and now instead of us working together to some extent, now we fuel this animosity, which I think would not be good. Maybe the hands-off approach is the best way to go here, because really, do we need to be in Syria? At one time, maybe, because we had a dependency on their oil. That's not the case anymore. It's not as urgent a situation because we are producing more oil at home and we are consuming less of it. So if Putin wants to be aggressive and do all the dirty work, there's a school of thought that says, let him do it, and I think that might be the wise thing.
This horrible crisis in Syria has caused, as Denise said, this quagmire, this civil war where hundreds of thousands of people are leaving Syria and flooding other countries. Does this have to come to an end?
but when and how, and we have no idea. I mean, I'm blown away that Kevin and I are in agreement here. We've been here. We were there in Vietnam. Vietnam was a civil war that we stupidly got involved in and put our reputation and not just our reputation, but the lives of our soldiers and young men and some women. And it was a horrible mistake that was sort of the defining moment, I think, for my generation, coming through college at that time and seeing that we could end up in that war at any time. That kept a lot of kids in college, let me tell you. Boy, we just keep doing these things over and over, getting involved places in very highly dangerous situations. And then, of course, if you add the Russians, and you add Iran, who is in there too, presumably on our side as well against ISIS, it gets crazy. Who are your friends and who are your enemies?
Who can you trust?
Yeah, who can you trust? And then what can happen by accident, as Denise says, that could put any of those forces, against each other. And it's just insane. And it's not helped by the fact that this is a U.S. election year, and you have many of, I'm sorry, Kevin's Republican candidates who are not nearly as intelligent as he is on this, who just want to, show how tough they are and talk tougher than this weak president, and it's just words, and it's words that are very dangerous words that are flying around, and now we've got dangerous forces flying around.
All right, we're going to move on to the next topic. The latest Marquette poll shows that Governor Walker's job approval rating now is lower than it has ever been. It's only 37%, with the majority saying he should not seek a third term. It also shows that Donald Trump is now the favorite candidate among Wisconsin Republicans. Do you find both of these results surprising or as expected for this point in time?
I find them both temporary. This seems to be a season where the flavor of the day, let alone the flavor of the season, is at rule. First off, I want to extend my condolences to the family of Marty Beal, who passed away this week. One of the governor's antagonists was Marty Beal, and I noticed that the newspaper had quoted Governor Thompson and how during those times when contract negotiations came up, they were always ready to reach some type of amicable conclusion, even though the process of getting there may have been very messy and very contentious. That's part of the residue that's created the numbers that we're seeing now for Governor Walker. There are people who are still very, very angry about it. There are people who are still somewhat hesitant to perhaps even acknowledge that there are pieces of Act 10 that work. So that's going to be something that will follow the governor around for the rest of his political career. He was able to successfully employ the strategy to implement Act 10, but at the same time, getting on the national stage with the same concept didn't work as well for him. With regards to Donald Trump, 25%. That's about the best that he's going to do nationally, which means 3/4 of the Republicans aren't going to have him as their nominee. So I look at it as a temporary kind of indication of where people are at. When you talk to most people, they like Trump's anger, but they don't hear a lot of details. And when it gets closer and closer to time to cast a vote, I don't see him being seriously in the mix.
What do you see Scott Walker as having to do to get more people to like him again? And they did like him. They liked him enough to elect him 3 times.
Well, he's a likable guy, but he wears on you. He really does. And there's been such a pattern. I mean, not only the Act 10 and rolling back labor laws from a century, but now the pattern of, well, let's get rid of the watchdogs that keep an eye on government and try to keep it honest. You know, Government Accountability Board or the Legislative Audit Bureau that looks into illegal activity and corrupt activity in state government. Why would either party, Republican or Democrat, want to get rid of that or want to remove the watchdogs that are trying to keep government honest? One of the things people are angry about government is the corruption, is the extreme partisanship where, you know, everybody on your side gets whatever they want, and the half of the state that voted for the other guys, we don't care about that half of the state. You know, their representatives don't even get to participate in Madison, and you know that makes people, you know, angry about government. But I'll tell you this, and I'm not so sure that Donald Trump is going to go away like many Republicans sort of wishfully think. Scott Walker had very little support nationally, and yet when he dropped out, a guy who was down to less than a 1% support nationally, Trump's support went up. And I think as these other Republican candidates drop out, Trump's support is going to go up. And that is because, and the Republican Party has earned it, the Republican Party has intentionally, you know, appealed to racism. And Donald Trump is the most racist candidate in the race. So, you know, when the racists that support Scott Walker or support Rubio or Ted Cruz, when those candidates drop out, if they do, some of those are going to go to Trump. So I don't think Trump is at his peak yet.
Do you think Trump eventually fades away?
Yes, and I agree with Joel to this degree that, and I've said this on the program, he's not a flavor of the day. He's going to be around for a while, all right? But there's a long way to go, and it's one thing to answer a telephone poll and say, you know, I really like that Donald Trump. Yeah, they like him because they maybe like going to auto races to see cars wreck, or they like to go to the circus or watch pro wrestling on TV. You know, he's entertaining and he's interesting to watch and listen to, whether you agree with him or not. But it's one thing to do that, and it's another thing to go into the polling place and, you know, pull the ballot for the guy. And when people see that he's so much bluster but no substance, that he really can't talk about the issues specifically, his support is going to go down. So I'm not surprised at either one of those revelations from the poll. The governor, I understand that most of the year he's not been in the state because he was running for president. There was a more contentious than normal budget process that he was involved with. I think he will work hard. But prior to entering the presidential race, I was privy to his schedule. And he is busy. He's all over the state meeting with all kinds of groups, farmers, small business people, you name it. He has to get back on that kind of schedule, and then you will see these numbers change, because I don't think people are that dissatisfied with him. A lot of conservatives I talked to said, you know, we love the guy. We wish he would get out of this race and come back and get back to fixing the state.
The conservatives are not his issue. When you look at that polling, it's the same weakness he's had before. He continues to lose support among independents. So he needs to figure out how he needs to stop preaching to the choir, because the choir doesn't matter to him. In terms of his political longevity, I don't think he's going to run for a third term. I do think that what we're going to see, and what we have seen, is people reacting to what happened in the budget process, and none of that has changed. People are reacting to the decimation of the UW system. They're reacting to some of the underhanded things that were taking place in terms of this whole open records law and what was or wasn't going to have to be made public. That is something that you don't earn back overnight, and you don't earn it by going to visit farmers and other folks. You have to step up and take a leadership role, admit that some things were wrong, listen to where people have said they have concerns, and work to fix it. That's how you get your reputation back.
All right, next topic. Right now, the University of Wisconsin is allowed to award just over a quarter of the seats in Madison to non-residents who pay nearly 3 times the $10,000 yearly tuition that Wisconsin residents pay. UW officials are going to ask the Board of Regents next week to lift the cap on the number of non-residents they are allowed to enroll, as many as they want. Is this a blatant grab for more money in these budget-cutting times? And is it taking a school that has been built and paid for by Wisconsin taxpayers and giving it away to the highest bidder?
blatant is a strong word, but it is a money grab. In the past, whenever there had been cuts to the UW budget and even freezes placed on tuition, there were always ways to recoup some of the money. The cuts in the last 10 years typically would allow for a recoup of some of that money by tuition increases. And when Governor Walker came on, he said no more tuition increases, and there was an effort made to spend down on some of the reserves that the system had. Well, now the system is faced after this last budget with both a freeze and enrollment caps, as well as having to trim their budgets. And the only way that the Madison campus, and it's the only campus that frankly is in a position to do it because all the other campuses don't have as strong an attraction for out-of-state students. But Madison campus has the ability to go after out-of-state students, and those students, because of the income levels of their families, have the ability to come up with the funding to cover that cost for tuition and housing and whatever other fees are involved there. This is, I think, the worst decision that the Madison campus could have made, because they can't articulate that those students that they're going to bring in are going to stay in the same numbers that those students who are Wisconsin residents do once they get their degrees. So it doesn't help the brain drain issue. The other piece is that it doesn't help the perception that Madison, tough as it is now to get into, that there aren't going to be seats available for in-state residents who have really strong grades. They're going to start looking at the competition like Northwestern, University of Chicago, University of Illinois even, Minnesota. We will lose our own in-state students that we're actually trying to keep here because historically they stay here after they get the degree.
Shouldn't the smart kid from Milwaukee, Appleton, Lodi, Fond du Lac have a much, much, much better chance to go to UW-Madison than the smart kid from California or New York or China or India?
Well, see, that's where you get into the side effects of the massive cut to the university and the budget problems that the university system have had, not just with this recent budget, but they've seen this writing on the wall for a long time. I do have to disagree with Gerard about one thing. UW-Milwaukee tries to attract a lot of international students as well because of the enormous tuition they get from them, and they're doing a very good job. You know, there's now a Chinese church right on my street, across the street from the university, because they have such a large Chinese population at UW-Milwaukee, and truthfully, it's a good thing for a university to draw diverse students from around the world and around the country. That shouldn't be looked at as a bad thing, but it is if you feel your kids aren't getting in the university because of what financially is happening to the university. And yes, they're going to go for the money. You know they're going to go for the money, and to some extent they have to go for money somewhere. When the politicians start whacking their budget $250 million at a time. And we shouldn't be put in that position of not wanting a diverse campus, not wanting students from other places, because we feel our kids are going to be shut out. And that's what's happening politically. And that's a very bad thing. And we ought to deal with that and talk about how to fund the university at the level we want so Wisconsin kids can get in there.
So Denise, Gerard said in the past when the budgets were cut, the UW could just raise tuition. Now they can't raise tuition. But don't you think the majority of parents and students think that's a great thing, that they go in knowing this is the tuition and this is what it's going to be next year and the year after that?
Well, as someone who's paying tuition, yes, I think that is a good thing, that you do have that certainty. But there are a couple of side consequences of this, particularly for middle-income families. You know what the tuition's going to be, but now the side effect of that is, because the university can't raise more money, is that it is making cuts, so it may take your kid an extra semester to graduate. So the tuition was frozen, but if it ends up costing you more money at the end of the day, what difference does that make? This suggestion by the UW administration really is a slap in the face of middle-class families in particular in Wisconsin. Already, we've seen the cuts at the university system that will impact, if not the quality of education for our students, it's going to impact the length of time it takes them to get through university. Now, a seat that you thought your kid had at a state university, that cap could be listed, and you could have, somebody come in from New Jersey. If we are going to remain strong in the state, I mean, the purpose of the university, in part, in terms of sharing ideas, is also to create a populace in this state that has the ability to do that. If we find ways that we are artificially now locking kids out of the system, we're going to lock them out of the state, and you might make a short-term gain in terms of what the university is going to be able to save or bring in terms of income, but the long-term effect could really be very detrimental.
Kevin, maybe this is a sophomoric observation, but you go up to Madison and they never stop building. They never stop building up there. Are they really that short of cash?
No, they cry this, these tears all the time, and they've got money, and maybe if they wouldn't have built up that huge controversial slush fund, then maybe politicians wouldn't have taken some of the actions that they did. I think this is a good idea in that you can't build up a wall and say, well, you're from California, or you're from Texas, or you're from Florida. We don't want you. We have certain quotas or what have you. They don't, but I'm just saying you can't keep kids out from other states. You just can't. But I think this is flawed because the expectation is we'll bring in all these kids that will help with the skills gap and help rebuild our workforce and rebuild the economy, et cetera, and they'll hang around, and that'll fix the brain drain when there's no guarantee that will happen.
All right, let's just take for a few minutes to talk about the Brewers wrapping up what has certainly been a horrible season. So they now have a new manager, a new general manager. What else does this team have to do so next year it's a better team that takes the field?
Well,
and usually we just say, oh, they have to stay healthy. Well, what else?
It's easy to say we're horrible, but remember last season, for most of the season, we were in first place. So yeah, this season was shocking. It wasn't just an accident at the end of last season that they collapsed. We had a whole season of collapse. But I have to say, as a fan, as you know I am, that boy, some of the trades that they made and some of the young talent that they've traded for, we now suddenly have lots of prospects within our own system. And some of these pitchers that have come up have been pretty impressive. And either we're going to trade some of those pretty impressive young pitchers to get even better pitchers, or some of them are going to turn out to be all right. And I don't think there's the gloom about next season. I think we see it as rebuilding, yes, and we've got two fresh guys in there, Counsell and Stearns, to do it. And I think there's quite a bit of optimism.
You've got to do two things very quickly. You have to do two things. One, build a team that's competitive, and two, build a team that's interesting and fun to watch, which you do not have right now. And if you're a season ticket holder, it's miserable to go out there and watch this truly horrendous team playing, because they are one of the worst teams in baseball, and that's not going to be fixed overnight.
Tell Cincinnati about that. Cincinnati fans aren't very happy either.
Well, yeah, they're just slightly better than us.
All right, we move on. One version of the American dream is that every boy or girl should have the chance to grow up to be president of the United States. Well, that's fine. But looking at some of today's leading contenders for 2016, Rick Horowitz wants to know just when the presidency became government's entry-level job. Rick.
Well, I've got some pretty exciting news to share with all of you today. After a long and immensely satisfying career in law and government service, in journalism and teaching and TV commentary, I'm today announcing my candidacy for the head of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins Children's Center. Now, this isn't anything I ever thought I'd do. It's not even anything I particularly wanted to do. But if that's what the Lord had in mind for me, well, then who was I to say no to him? Now, some of you are probably thinking, but Rick, you have absolutely no experience in neurosurgery, let alone pediatric neurosurgery. What qualifies you to offer yourself as a candidate for this position? Well, I'd expect some to doubt me, but the important thing is never to doubt yourself, and I don't. I just point out when it comes to pediatric neurosurgery that I was once a child myself, and also I have nerves in my head and all over my body. I'll also remind you, in my many years of working in government and covering government, I've dealt with many people whose brains were not in 100% working order. So this won't be anything new for me, except maybe some of the cutting. So you're still wondering, a few of you, okay, sure, be a neurosurgeon if that's what the Lord is calling you to do, but director? Is director of pediatric neurosurgery and at a leading institution like Johns Hopkins, no less, really an entry-level job? Shouldn't you start a little lower down the ladder? I say America has been built by people who dreamed high and thought high and then acted high. So I have every faith, and my faith is a constitutionally compatible faith, not like some faiths I could name. I have every faith that my never attending medical school or even taking a biology class since high school will be no impediment to taking on this critical job at this critical time. That's what democracy is all about. That's what America is all about. God bless America.
Well, thanks, Rick, and thank you so very much for watching. Enjoy the rest of your weekend.